So, welcome to another edition of Ozarks Voices, a oral history project of the Missouri State University Libraries. My name is Tom Peters. I'm the Dean of Libraries here at Missouri State. Today's date is Tuesday, September 12th, 2017. We're here in my office in Duane G. Meyer Library, and our special guest today is Pete Morgan. Pete, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a joy to be here.
Pete has had an amazing life, but I think for this interview we want to focus on your Route 66 experiences as a child and a young man and beyond. So tell us first, where were you born?
Well, I was born in Carterville, Missouri, actually in Johnstown, which later became part of Carterville.
Okay.
Carterville is on Route 66, just about 8-10 miles east of the Kansas line.
Kansas line in Jasper County.
In Jasper County, Missouri.
Jasper County, Missouri. So you were born in what year?
1932.
32. Okay.
Hoover was in the White House.
Okay, so you're a Depression baby.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you grew up during some tough times.
We moved whenever the rent came due.
Yeah, so you're moving around quite a bit. Mainly Jasper County, but also into Lawrence?
Jasper County.
Green?
Jasper County into Kansas City area.
Really?
Back and forth. My father worked off and on for a couple of years at the Ford assembly plant in Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
He said his job was to screw windshields onto 32 Fords. But work came and went with Ford, and strikes were coming in. The labor unions were moving in, and the work was very uncertain. So one week he was working, the next week we were looking for a place to live. And then we would gravitate back to Jasper County, where the family had been for, at that point, 75 years.
Jasper County was sort of home base for
Home base, yes.
Yeah, okay.
For both of our families.
But throughout the 30s and into the 40s, it was tough times.
The 30s were up until about 1938, 39. My father went into the liquor business after Prohibition died, and went to Carthage. He and a partner, with $50 between them, put down $25 rent on a building on the square and another $25 to the wholesaler to put some merchandise on the shelves, and went into the whiskey business. And a few months later, the government started building Camp Crowder down the road, and they moved in about 20,000 very thirsty carpenters, plumbers.
And so they were in the right place at the right time.
Absolutely.
With the right product.
The right product, and his timing was impeccable.
And their liquor store, was in the southwest corner of the square.
Correct.
In Carthage.
Right.
Building still standing.
Building still standing,
Yeah.
one-story building.
So it's the south side of the square, the westernmost building on the south side.
Exactly.
Of the square. Yep.
Exactly.
Still there.
Still there.
So I knew you lived, you sort of lived around Route 66, various
Yes.
places, and moving around during the 30s. But there was one domicile, I guess you'd say, that was actually in western Greene County in the
Right.
little town of Plano.
Plano.
The building's still standing. Describe where you were living, and
All right.
you were about 4 or 5, 5,
I was
6?
about 4 and 5.
Yeah,
It was,
okay. So you remember living there?
oh, I remember very well.
Yeah.
I learned quite a bit there from my grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
Like I fired my first shotgun.
In Plano?
In Plano. Granddad took me across the road. We're going to go hunt rabbits, he said. He took a 410 shotgun, kind of stood behind me and pointed me in one direction. Said, "Okay, now squeeze the trigger."
Do you remember?
Bam!
Remember what happened? Did you get
Yes.
knocked on your keister? Or,
Practically. But he got me used to it. He was a fun guy. But now, the little town of Plano really wasn't a town. It was just an area. And there were 2 buildings in Plano. The one was nothing but 4 walls, standing with trees growing in the middle of them. And the other was kind of cornered from there, the town, I should say, gas station, grocery store, garage, which my grandparents were operating at the time from Tidal Oil Company.
Mm-hmm.
And they sort of serviced the local community with bread and milk. And my grandmother made a wicked hamburger.
Mm.
And that was their menu at the restaurant, was hamburgers, 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 or cheeseburger. And it was the only thing they served. And I remember as a kid, my granddad would, they sold cigarettes, of course, at 10 cents a pack. My granddad would, at age 4, would say, "Okay, son, this fellow wants a package of wings or a package of Chesterfield. Now be sure to get your dime."
So you were involved in the business operation.
The business operation.
And you had one pump for...
One pump, and it was a pump. You pumped gas into a glass tank.
Yeah.
Set up there, and then you hosed it.
How did that work? There were gradations on there. If you
Yes.
you pay for 2 gallons. Would you pay in advance? Say I need 2 gallons of gas.
Oh, let me say that some of them didn't pay at all because during the Depression, a lot of people would run bills that they say, "I'll pay you when I get paid. When I get paid, you'll get paid."
Credit. Yeah.
Well, they never got paid, and they left town.
Yeah.
That happened all too often. But out behind the gas station, which is still there, but it's a private residence now, there were about 3 or 4 little shacks, I'd call them, that my grandparents lovingly called tourist cabins. And they were pretty grim. Yeah. But the winter of 36, I think, winter of 36 we spent there. Mm-hmm. Dad was out of work at the moment. And grandmother had this gas station, but it only had 1 bedroom in it. Mm-hmm. And so we occupied the tourist cabins out back.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You didn't rent them out.
Oh, no.
Oh,
we lived in them.
Yeah. Okay.
And then,
so did you have your own cabin as a 4-year-old? Or?
Oh, I don't remember that. I think we were all probably sleeping in the same bed trying to stay warm.
Yeah.
And at that, Dad got a job in Joplin, clerking in a liquor store, and on Main Street, and that was a great job. It paid money, so he moved us to the little town of Dunaweg, Missouri, which is east of Joplin, about 4 miles, where he was born and had gone all the way through high school in Dunaweg. Mm-hmm. And as he said, and I said later about Carthage, it looks great in the rearview mirror. The first thing you want to do when you graduate from high school is leave town and go somewhere. The town is still there, sort of. And it used to be a bustling community with, I think it had 2 or 3 grocery stores, a drugstore, several physicians had offices there, service stations, everything. But now it's nothing.
Yeah. And that was back in the time when you wouldn't go to a larger town to shop or to get medical.
No, for your day-to-day things, you
stayed in town.
Stayed in town.
Go to the...
Maybe, because most people didn't have that kind of transportation just to be able to go get in the car and go to Joplin.
Right, and it cost money.
It cost money
to drive down the road.
But fortunately,
still does. But...
Yeah, and Granddad at that time left Plano. I forget exactly what the circumstances were that caused them to give up the residence at Plano, but they moved to Joplin to Smelter Hill, which is an area where there's a lead and zinc smelter owned by Eagle Pitcher Company. And right across the road from the main entrance of there was a little building where they opened another restaurant serving hamburgers, and cheeseburger. And Granddad stayed in that for a couple of years, I guess.
Yeah.
And then they had
was that on 66 or was that?
No, it's off 66.
Yeah, Dunaweg was off 66.
Yes.
Part of that,
Now, for some reason, they've renamed that road through Dunaweg as Route 66. Yeah. I think it's just a county road 66.
Yeah, I don't think it was ever part of that.
Oh no, it was never part of the main
Route 66.
America's Highway.
Question back to Plano.
Sure.
Even back then, you mentioned that the building kitty corner northwest across the intersection there was roofless and derelict? Or?
Yes.
Really? When you were living
it looks just like it does now.
Really?
I don't know when it collapsed or fell in or whatever. But as I understand it, reading about it, that the building was built in 1901
Yeah.
and had been a grocery store. It had been several things.
Right.
And they even talked.
By the mid-30s, it was derelict.
It was gone. Yeah, I mean the building.
So it's been that way for 80 years.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Well, the walls are well built.
Obviously, I don't know who owns it or who built it or anything
Yeah.
about it,
Wow.
except that I remember it was a wreck then. And it's a wreck now.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember any I mean, so mid-30s would have been people. Did you have any people that were going on their way to California seeking a better life going down 36? Do you remember anybody who stopped at the store and was
Well, I'm sure
from
that
New York City or headed to California?
not
or,
specifically there. Of course, I was too young to know what they were talking about.
Yeah.
I was living a good life. I mean,
Yeah.
my parents were wonderful. They saw to it that I was kept fed and warm and relatively happy.
They could shoot a shotgun, so
Yeah,
life was good.
oh man, hey, a 5-year-old shooting a shotgun's a big deal. and I really don't remember that. And Carthage, after we moved there, I was in the 3rd grade, and we lived not too far from a railroad track. And Carthage was a cross line of 2 railroads. I think St. Louis and Frisco. Or Kansas City Southern, I forget the lines. But it was also a haven for hobos at the time. The guys riding there. And they'd stop off in Carthage and beg
Yeah.
for food and money, whatever.
Right.
Anything but
Day
work.
laborers. Oh, they didn't want to work.
They didn't want to work.
Oh, yeah.
Give me some food and I'm on my way.
Yeah.
And we had them occasionally there in Carthage.
Would they come into the restaurant?
No, it wasn't a restaurant. They'd go to private homes. And they'd find some home that looked convenient or easy.
They'd mark homes too, would they?
I've heard that. I'm not familiar with
homes too.
their procedure, but I've heard that they would chuck mark
Right.
an X or a Y or whatever
Right.
as to whether or not it was an easy pick or tough folks or had a big dog.
Right. And you spent up through high school. You spent in,
Yes, I was in
Jasper
Carthage.
County.
And all the way through high school.
Yeah.
Carthage, in 1939, we moved from Dunaweg to Carthage. In Dunaweg, I'd gone to the 1st and 2nd grades in the same room at the same time. So I covered both grades 1 year. When we moved to Carthage, I was automatically in the 3rd grade.
Mm-hmm.
And we stayed there 10 years in Carthage. And we lived in 6 different houses, and I went to 5 different schools.
In 10 years.
In Carthage, in one town,
Yeah.
in 10 years.
Did you ever ride the bus, or was it always?
Oh, no, there
walk?
were no buses.
Yeah, walk.
They had a bus for the kids out in the country.
Yeah. But in
But
town, you
in
just
town, no bus. You got to school the best way you could,
Yeah.
which usually was bicycle or walking.
Yeah. So when did you graduate from high school? I'm trying to remember.
1949.
49.
Right. And,
So you were in Carthage during the war years.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were there. Camp Crowder was roaring with about 40,000 troops there during the war.
So when they had a weekend pass or something, would they come into town? Or?
Carthage, yes.
Yeah.
Carthage and Joplin were very popular. Springfield was too.
Yeah. Would they come over to Springfield?
Springfield was big leave town, I guess, because there was more action here. A bigger town. There's almost 50,000 people here then.
Yeah. So what was it like? I mean, were there just a lot of soldiers?
A lot of soldiers and a lot of fun watching them.
Yeah.
And of course, Dad had the liquor stores.
Yeah.
And he and his partner. Both of them were draft age, but both of them had 2 children, which was exempt at the moment.
Yeah.
And so they hired or brought in as a 3rd partner an older gentleman who was far beyond the draft age. And his job as a 3rd owner, his job was to run the store during the day. They opened at 6 in the morning until midnight. He'd run the store during the day. Dad and his partner Bus both worked at Camp Crowder as civilian employees of the government.
Uh-huh.
And they'd come in at 5 o'clock when they got off work and run the store of the nights.
Yeah, how late would it stay open most nights till
Midnight.
Midnight. So it was only down from midnight to 6 a.m.
That's right.
Wow.
They had open at 6 to catch the early birds.
Yeah, wow. And it was all packaged liquor.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yeah. There was no open liquor
Per drink, yeah.
per drink. There was beer, but that was it.
So when you were in high school, Jasper County has one of the few remaining drive-in movie theaters along
Yes.
66,
Right.
historic 66. I just saw in today's paper that this is their last weekend for this season.
Oh,
But did you go to the drive-in theater?
oh, quite often. You're right.
Yeah.
It opened in 1948, as I recall.
Oh, it's like when you were a junior in high school.
Right.
Yeah, so that must have been a big thing.
And that was the year I could drive.
Oh my
I
gosh.
turned 16,
Yeah.
so I could get a driver's license,
Yeah.
which cost $0.25 at the gas station. You could buy your driver's license.
Really? No photo ID?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
No, old Gus down at the gas station wrote you out a receipt, says, "Here's your driver's license, kid. Give me $0.25."
And so you go. What did you do when you were mobile? Did you?
Oh, well, that was Dad. At the end of the war, during the war, you could not get home appliances,
Yeah.
refrigerators, washing machines, that thing. But there were repair shops, and Dad read in the Kiplinger letter that appliances were going to be the hot item at the end of the war.
Once the war ended.
So he went across the street to the guy that had the little repair shop, who did not read the Kiplinger letter, and bought his whole business for $500, which included the franchises for Frigidaire, GE, Maytag. The guy had all
Really?
the franchises. Dad bought the whole thing, $500,
Uh-huh.
sold his interest in liquor stores to the other two partners, and went in the home appliance business.
Uh-huh.
Now his modus operandi, in order to get merchandise, which is a problem, because everybody all over the country wanted appliances.
Yeah.
Dad would go to the liquor store, fill a suitcase with bottles of scotch, go down and get on a train, go to Detroit where they made Frigidaire, or go to Newton, Iowa where they made Maytag, get a hold of the sales manager, set a bottle of scotch on the table and say, "Let's make a deal. I want a carload of merchandise." And pretty soon here come a carload of merchandise.
So he did his merchandise. And so after the war, it didn't transition immediately to boom times, or
No, the guys were coming back, and some guys were not coming back.
Right.
And that created a problem.
Right.
And after the war, as a matter of fact, on May the 9th, 1945, which is the day after VE Day,
Right.
I got my big job. I was apprenticed to the town embalmer to learn the funeral trade at the ripe old age of 12. I was to be 13 in about another 10 days.
You were learning how to embalm at age 12.
At age 13. So I started working a 4-year apprenticeship at a funeral home. And the advantage was our home was about a mile from school. The funeral home was a block and a half. So I'd go to school during the day and lived in a funeral home.
Uh-huh.
I had a room at a funeral home for a 13-year-old kid.
Yeah.
My room was out back. It had 2 doors. That door went into a 6-car dark garage. That door went into the preparation room.
Oh my gosh. So either way,
Either way, it was spooky.
Yeah.
But it didn't bother me.
Yeah.
It inured after a while.
Yeah. And then you graduated from high school.
Yes.
Then what did you do?
Well, I finished my 4 years at the funeral home, but I was too young to get a license. I was 17.
How old do you have to be? 21?
18.
18?
Yeah, to even take the test, then
Yeah.
21. Yeah. So I decided, what do I want to do? And I had done a couple of broadcasts locally, just school stuff playing around. I decided I want to be a radio announcer. Now there's a job with no heavy lifting. And
Raise and lower your voice.
let your voice do the work. So I went to Kansas City. Got on the bus, went up to Kansas City, and literally haunted every radio station until one of them decided, all right, kid, we'll hire you. The big problem was, growing up in southern Missouri, I had a dialect.
Really?
It's called the Beverly Hillbilly Syndrome.
Really?
Yes. I always said Jed Clampett was my speech teacher. It's, and, I could conjugate the verb affixing to. And one radio station finally said, okay, kid, we'll hire you. But you're going to sweep the floor, you're going to wash the windows, you're going to pull records, you're going to put records away. Yeah. You're going to do everything, but you're not going near a microphone until you lose that accent. Oh. You got 6 months.
How did you do that? How did you practice at night or something?
Oh, yeah, I practiced constantly. Yeah. Try to lose a hillbilly accent. Uh-huh. Because they have a very special accent in that area in southern Missouri. Yeah. And it's very unique. Mm-hmm. There'll be some people here at our show tomorrow from there that I grew up with. Mm-hmm. And when you hear their accent, you'll know it.
They didn't lose it.
They never left town. Yeah. And I was going to school also. I registered at the University of Kansas City before it was UMKC. Mm-hmm. And trying to go to college during the day and work at the radio station from 3 to 11 at night. And trying to meet at 7:30 class the next morning just didn't work. Yeah. So my grades suffered. Mm. And they suggested that I find some other school. Mm. So I came to Springfield. Mm-hmm. And they told me, said, all right, well, we'll take you. And I said, thank you. And so I started in Springfield in 1950. Mm-hmm. 50 and 51.
Yeah. So you were a sophomore?
No, yes, a sophomore. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So 49, 50 was a freshman in Kansas City.
So you finished your freshman year up in Kansas City?
Yes.
And then you came down here?
Came down here.
Yeah.
Loved it. Yeah. But I was not a good student. As a matter of fact, I was on scholastic probation. Hmm. And then in 1951, or 1950, excuse me, I decided to, along with some fraternity brothers, to join the Naval Reserve here in Springfield, which we did. Mm-hmm. And then I started my military career, if you want to call it that. And we're sent to Olathe, Kansas, Olathe Naval Air Station, where I was working, learning to be a ball turret gunner on the old TBM aircraft from World War II. Mm-hmm. And one weekend in Kansas City, I was walking down the street and I saw this sign in the recruiting window that said, be an officer, join the Army. So I walked in and said, tell me about this. The sergeant said, well, what you do is you sign up and we send you for a physical, what do they call it, physical and interview. Uh-huh. And if you qualify, we'll send you an officer. Yes, 6 months you'd be an officer. I'm 18 years old. That sounds wonderful to me. So I said, the only hitch is I'm in the Navy. He said, that's no problem. He said, if you pass everything, we'll transfer you. I said, you can do that? He says, you sure can.
So you started off in the Navy Reserve.
The Naval Reserve.
And then you switched over to the Army.
Switched over to the Army.
Officer Corps.
No, I wasn't an officer yet.
Officer training. Officer training.
I had to go through all the basic training.
Really?
They shipped me back to Camp Crowder, 20 miles from home. So I called my dad and mom and my girlfriend at the time and said, guess where I am? I said, we'll be down there in half an hour. And was there for induction and getting my uniforms and all that. Yeah. Then they put us on a bus and took us to Fort Leonard Wood. Uh-huh. I was at Fort Leonard Wood for 6 months waiting for a class to open up.
Now, what was that like?
We were the first troops in Fort Leonard Wood since they'd closed it in 1946. The weeds were about waist high in all of the areas.
Deserted, pretty much?
Deserted. We were the first troops into this one area. Like I said, the weeds were this high. They rushed up to the barracks, threw open the doors, and there was no floor. Somebody had stolen the oak floors. So I kept going through school there and
How long were you there? How long were you?
6 months.
6 months.
Yeah, for a
Did you
2-month
get any
course.
weekend passes or anything?
After a while.
66 went right through, right by
Yeah.
there too. So.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
And occasionally I'd get a weekend pass.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a set deal every weekend.
Yeah. Where would you go if you had a weekend pass?
Back home to Carthage.
Oh, okay.
It was about 150 miles.
So you must have driven down Route 66.
Well, yeah, there was several of us from that area, Joplin, Carthage.
Yeah.
And I'd catch a ride with them for
Yeah.
$5 each way or something.
Yeah.
And back and forth.
Any memories of those trips?
Not really. They were starting to build I-44 or 4-lane
Right.
66 at that time.
Right.
And I remember coming back one night. It was late, and we were trying to get back to camp before midnight. And it was dark, and the driver got off onto the new highway. It ended.
Did he stop? Or?
Oh, he stopped just before falling off the end of the concrete. And got back on the old 66 the rest of the way to Waynesville.
Yeah.
That was an exciting time. Finally they made me a casual, which means that I'd gone through training, I'd gone through infantry training, I'd gone through engineer training. They just didn't have any place to put me, waiting for a class to open for officer training. So they put me out teaching explosives and demolitions. And I got an entire respect for TNT and blasting caps.
Uh-huh.
And I taught that for a while.
Yeah.
And then suddenly a class opened up, and for February of '52, and they promoted me to sergeant and sent me off to Fort Benning. And then I was at Fort Benning for 6 months, going through OCS. Successfully graduated, and waiting my assignment anywhere in the world. And my assignment was to stay at Fort Benning on the faculty teaching.
So you must have been a good teacher.
Well, they looked at my records and said he'd been a radio announcer. He evidently knows how to talk. So let's make him an instructor.
Gotten rid of your.
I assume that, yes,
Gotten
oh
rid
yeah.
of your Jasper County accent.
I assume that's their thinking. I really don't know.
Yeah.
But it was a plum assignment.
Yeah.
And to be a faculty member. And teaching in the Ranger Department. Small unit tactics. A boring subject, but we tried to make it interesting.
How long did you do that?
18 months.
18. Okay. So,
And then my tour expired. And I took my GI Bill and came back to Springfield. And at that time,
so what year would this been?
1954.
Okay.
54, February 54.
February 54. You're back in Springfield.
Back in Springfield.
All right.
Just in time for the spring term.
Yeah.
And living in the barracks, which were old GI barracks left over from World War II, was surrounded on 3 sides the swimming pool, which then was behind the athletic building.
Yeah. And it must have been about where the Union is today?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's actually, it's between the Union and, well, I'm not real sure. That's I'm kind of confused on the placement of some of the things.
Up in there somewhere.
Yeah.
That part of campus.
Right. And
Did
we
it
lived
have a floor?
Beg pardon?
Did it have a floor?
It had a floor, but no insulation. And it was a coal oil heater.
Oh.
One of those great big heaters.
Yeah.
We poured 5 gallons of kerosene in the back, and
So you're living in those barracks?
lived there for 2 years.
Yeah.
And finally, in '56, February 28th of 1956, I took my last final. And said, see ya.
Graduated?
Graduated.
Yeah.
And my daughter was born that morning.
Really?
The timing.
Yeah. So then what'd you do?
Took a job in the business world with a sales engineer with White Rogers Electric Company. They sent me to Chicago, which was an experience in itself, to learn wholesaling of heating and air conditioning controls and systems. Wholesaling, right. And that was exciting, except that I did not like Chicago. The weather was horrible. I had Cook County as a territory, which is all up and down the lake.
Right.
And invariably at 5 o'clock at night, I'd wind up on the north side, and I lived way on the south side. I mean, it's just the way the thing worked. It was a 2-hour drive going home. You know. So in 1959, my father sent me a clipping from the Wall Street Journal from the Maytag company advertising for a regional manager. Mm-hmm. And so I fired off a letter, application. And I found out there were 360 replies, and I got the job. Wow. So, of course, it helped that 10 years earlier, Dad had been a Maytag dealer.
Yeah. What region did you get? Regional manager?
Missouri, Arkansas, and Tennessee.
Oh.
Portions of each.
Like southern Missouri, northern Arkansas?
Well, southeastern Missouri. Lived in Poplar Bluff for a while.
Oh, yeah.
In Cape Girardeau. Then was transferred to Franklin, Tennessee, just south of Nashville. And then from there back to Liberty, Missouri, just outside of Kansas City. And was with Maytag for 9 years. Loved it. A great job. Travel constantly, though, was the only drawback.
Yeah.
And then Dad, at this time, had gone into the securities business and was very successful. He and another partner got the idea that they would go into the investment banking business, and they invited me to become a third partner and director.
And roughly how old were you? 40?
No, I was, let's see, it was in 1967, so I'd have been 35.
35. Okay.
So I grudgingly left Maytag.
Yeah.
Got my
tough
security.
decision.
It was very tough.
Yeah.
Because I was fast tracked in Maytag.
Yeah.
And got my securities license and went into securities business. And it was an absolute bust. I had more troubles getting retail clients. I was not a success at retail. So I had an opportunity to go with the company that we were investment banking for, which was an oil and gas company that wanted to start a mutual fund handling oil and gas properties only. That sounded exciting. So I left the firm, family firm, and went with King Resources out of Denver. Again, it was a security, a mutual fund. And they were just starting out, and we had bankrolled them. And I opened up Ohio and Indiana for them. Wholesaling. I loved wholesaling, and I was very successful at it. It's a field, a very narrow field of wholesale of mutual funds. And
Because you loved it.
I loved it. It sort of satisfied the ham in me in one way, because my job consisted of going around to brokerage firms, getting all the brokers together and giving a lecture on the glories and benefits of selling our fund, and teaching them how to merchandise oil and gas properties. And that worked out well. And then suddenly Mr. King, who owned the company, got crosswise with the Securities Exchange Commission and violated his prospectus. And we, by that time, I was vice president in Kansas City. And we got a call on Thursday before Labor Day saying, we're out of business. So tonight, fire your secretary, tell the building to change the locks on the door, put your furniture in storage, your checks in the mail, and have a nice weekend.
Wow.
That was before the Labor Day weekend.
Wow.
1970.
Wow.
So, okay. So that was a happy weekend. So I started casting around, and there were several opportunities. And one that I accepted was moving to Indianapolis to be national sales manager for a mutual fund insurance company, Unified Underwriters, which I took and started in January of '71 over there. And I was replacing, as sales manager, the one of the originators, owners of the company. and he had run it from day one. It was now like 25 years in. And he was wanting to retire. But the problem was he wanted to retire, but he didn't want all of his ideas to retire. And I started coming up with new concepts.
Yeah.
He said, it won't work. Why won't it work? Because we've never done it. Oh.
Sounds like the
So he didn't want to let go. He says, you're a sales manager, make it happen. I said, well, here's what I want to do. Well, you can't do that. Well, we got to do something.
So there was a tension there, a frustration.
You might say that. Finally, it was, look, what good am I doing? Well, not much if you ain't doing anything. Well, I can't do much because you won't let go long enough.
Right.
So anyway, we parted company.
Yeah.
And I was living in an apartment complex at that time. That's where I met Sarah.
In Indianapolis.
In Indianapolis. She was living there too. She was
What
working
year,
for
what year was this?
71.
71.
Sarah was working for Purdue University.
Uh-huh.
And at that point, I was an unemployed wholesaler. But that didn't last long. I signed on with the Massachusetts company out of Boston, which was the country's oldest corporate trustee. And their shtick, you might say, their main thing was that they could offer trustee services in addition to a group of mutual funds. So now my job is to go around and gather these brokers together and lecture them on inter vivos trusts, legal papers. Now I've moved from being an oil man to being a lawyer. And I had to open every seminar with the idea that I am not a lawyer. I'm a paid spokesman. And I always had a lawyer with me, though, on the stand to answer legal questions. Keep us legal. Stayed with them for 9 years. Yeah. Sarah and I
Enjoyed it?
loved it. Finally, after 2 years, they transferred us to Arizona. And
So 73?
at 70, we were married in 73.
Yeah.
And then in 75, we moved to Arizona.
Okay. And you've been out there ever since?
Ever since. Love it. Plan to stay there.
Yeah.
And, well, there we are.
Good. Well, thanks
Bye.
for sharing,
Anything else on 66 that we can answer?
any just memories that you have of traveling on 66? So when you were living in Arizona, you must have come back to.
Well, we did, but
you know the trip now. Like,
oh, very well. We're on first name terms with the fence posts. We could tell someone oh look, they painted their house.
That's right. So you've been on 66, at least that stretch of 66, so many times that you must have like a routine down.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
We've tried every route.
Yeah.
To make a difference.
Yeah.
We've tried I-44, 66,
Right.
60, all of those
Yeah.
ways to somehow to break up the boredom of straight lines.
Yeah.
But
Well, I've only done that trip about 4 times, but I'm not bored with it. I just love it.
That's
It's
good.
a beautiful trip.
oh, I think, yeah, the first 6 or 8 times we loved it.
Yeah. Okay. I got about 4 more. Huh?
What about the last 30 times?
Okay. Well, thanks very much for sharing your a little bit of your life history and some of your memories with us about.
Good.
And so now we have indelibly etched an image of a 4 or 5 year old boy in Plano, Missouri, holding a shotgun,
Yeah.
shooting a rabbit, trying to shoot a rabbit.
Trying to
Did you
shoot
hit
it.
the rabbit or?
No, there was no rabbit. His granddad just wanted to give me to shoot something.
It might have been a clay pigeon for all,
For all I know.
That's right. Tin can on a post or something. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks very much.
Happy to do it, and I hope we've covered some ground.
We did. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.